What is community? What is sacred community? I was reminded in January that there's a reason we call a synagogue a Kehillah Kedoshah, a holy congregation. When my sister Wendy died suddenly, unexpectedly after foot surgery, I was packing up from my time on a writing retreat in Maine. In an isolated home near Bath, I awoke to my mother's call. And there, after talking with Mom, after talking with my brother-in-law, in the silence of the woods as the sun crept up over Totman Cove and the stunning but frozen landscape, I felt the weight of aloneness. My sister didn't die alone, but on that day, until I drove my car over the bridge into Manhattan and the embrace of family, I grieved her alone. Today is Volunteer Shabbat, and I want to say something about what it means to give your time, attention, and love to this Kehillah Kedoshah. I want to celebrate you, hundreds of you who contribute to our community in countless non-quantifiable ways. But to do so, I hope you'll indulge a personal story from last month that concretized for me the ways community, holy community, can matter. I struggled quite a bit, you see, to figure out how to grieve for my sister. She wasn't religious, at least not in the ways that I am. She chose to be cremated, which, taking my rabbi hat off for a moment, was quite hard for me on a personal level. She was a wonderful person in so many ways that I won't go into at this time, and a complicated person in ways that I also won't share. But what I can say definitively is that the container of Jewish mourning, the modalities of grief our tradition offers and from which I draw so much strength and comfort, is not the container that she would enter for me if the situation were reversed. Now, this doesn't mean it's wrong for me to daven for her, or say Kaddish for her, or sit Shiva for her, or tear my shirt for her, as I did when my mother called and I sat alone in my bedroom in Maine. These are behaviors our ancestors have done for thousands of years, and it's not wrong for you, many of you, who have chosen to honor your loved ones in ways that reflect your own needs and traditions, but not those of the family members you remember. I've been with so many of you in hospital rooms, living rooms, Zoom rooms, as you've tried to navigate the desire to honor someone's wishes and the need to honor yourselves in a world in which they left you through no fault of their own without them. What I'm trying to say is that I personally found myself feeling untethered betwixt and between not who my sister was and who I am, but between the community I needed and the communities available to me. In other words, I found myself during the Shloshim period for my sister, which just ended, on sabbatical, bouncing from place to place, mostly apart, or largely apart, from my mother and Miriam, my kids, my nephew, my brother-in-law in Chicago, and mostly apart from all of you. So before I share the story, I want to tell you about my sojourn in Tel Aviv and how I ended up not in synagogue when it came time to say Kaddish. I want to pause to say this. The one day of traditional Shiva I was able to cobble together here in Baltimore, the time I had face-to-face with many of you who came by our home, the Shiva Minyanim we held together on the first Wednesday of February, the handwritten cards and beautiful emails, the phone calls, and gifts in memory of my sister so many of you shared with me. Each of these encounters was a salve to the open wound of my family's sudden loss. And my time in Niles, Illinois, sitting with friends and family, looking through old photo albums in the living room where my sister and I once danced and ran around banging tambourines while my grandfather played old Yiddish melodies on the upright piano. That too was a great comfort. And none of that, not this shul, not my wife and children, not my community in Chicago, was available to me the following Thursday in Tel Aviv. What was available were 100 Orthodox shuls and an iPhone app telling me where to find a minyan so that I could fulfill my obligation as a mourner and say Kaddish each day for 1 month for my sister. Okay, so here's the story. I arrived to Israel Wednesday, February 8th, rented a car and drove 2 hours north to my cousin Roe, who lives with his wife and 2 sons in Bachan, a former kibbutz east of Netanya, and across the Green Line from Tulkarem, a Palestinian city in the West Bank. When people talk about Israel being 9 miles across, that's more or less the section of Israel they're talking about, from my cousin's house to the sea. Knowing my cousin is secular, I had hoped to say Kaddish on the plane in one of those ortho mosh pits crammed in the rear galley of the airline near the bathrooms, but I actually slept during the flight, and by the time I awoke, it was well past daybreak. The ride was bumpy, and the seatbelt sign was on for most of the rest of the flight. I couldn't reach my tefillin. Saying Kaddish with 9 men that hadn't already done so was simply not an option. Since my sister wouldn't have cared whether I was saying Kaddish for her anyway, I went into the trip thinking I'd say the words in a minyan at least once a day, but agreeing to go easy on myself if it didn't work out. Wednesday, it didn't work out. I had a lovely time with my cousin, who had met my sister a couple of times as we shared family stories and caught up on life in general. Thursday morning, I had plans to see a different cousin in Beit Shemesh for dinner, but that would be after sunset. There was still time to offer the memorial prayer that afternoon. I figured I'd catch a minyan in Tel Aviv or in Jaffa. As it turned out, my friend Avi from Chicago was on a work trip in Tel Aviv. We met up and we took a long walk along the beach promenade. It was a lovely day for February in Israel. The sun was shining. Dozens of Israelis ran around with dogs or frisbees or played soccer volleyball. That's a real sport, by the way. Just imagine beach volleyball, but with no hand soccer rules. It's pretty impressive, actually. We had lunch at a fabulous meat restaurant on the Tel Aviv port, and then walked all the way south toward Jaffa. Avi had a client call, so he went to find a nice spot on the beach. I told him I was going to try to daven Mincha Mariv at an egalitarian conservative congregation in Neve Tzedek in South Tel Aviv. He told me to hit him up if it didn't work out, and perhaps we'd meet for a drink before I headed east to my cousin's home. So with time to kill, before sunset, I kept walking south toward Jaffa. Standing at the ancient port in Jaffa, gazing out at the sinking sun over the Mediterranean Sea, I pulled out my iPhone and thumbed my way to the website for the Kehillah, that conservative synagogue in Neve Tzedek. Apparently, unfortunately, they did not have a regular daily minyan. Perhaps this shouldn't have surprised me, or perhaps I should have checked earlier. Beth Am, of course, doesn't have a daily minyan either. I just figured that in a country full of Jews, it would be a simple task to pull 10 of them together twice a day. Go figure. My Kaddish app, though, was still available. There were dozens of synagogues in walking distance that offered mincha, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Hasidic, but all of them, it seemed, did not count women, did not feel aligned with my own values. I had davened in Orthodox shuls before, of course, and I would do so again, including later that night. But in that moment, I felt torn between the experience I needed, the community I needed, and the one that was available. Standing there, I couldn't help but think of another Jew who stood in Jaffa trying to decide what direction he would take. Jonah, the prophet, did thousands of years ago, before that moment, perhaps in that very spot. God told him to go to Nineveh, to prophesy to the Assyrians and demand their repentance. We read the story every Yom Kippur afternoon. Jonah thought about it, then booked a trip from the port of Jaffa to North Africa. Jonah was commanded to head east to Nineveh. He went west to Tarshish. On some level, I believed I was commanded to head to synagogue. I went to Beer Bazaar. That's a microbrewery. Avi joined me soon after, and the two of us sat with our pints in a hip section of Yafo, and we just talked. Now, I could ask you how we know what God wants, but that's not the question that's on my mind today. Instead, I ask what happens when the tradition we have that we love and respect presents itself in a way that's hard to reconcile with our values. If I thought for a moment it was essential for my sister's soul that I say Kaddish every day, I would have found an Orthodox minyan. If I thought for a moment my sister would have insisted that I say Kaddish for her, I would have done the same. If I had stumbled onto a minyan, even an Orthodox one, I would have said Kaddish. That exact thing did happen that Shabbat afternoon in Jerusalem. Just before the sunset, I had been wandering around through the city and through the old city, and before I headed that night to Ben Gurion Airport to pick up our friends Tom and Linnell, I was sitting at the Kotel, and a couple Sephardi guys came up to me and said, in that way that Orthodox men ask and tell at the same time, Mincha. But they were Sephardi, so they said, Mincha. So I sat until they found 7 other guys, and they read from their beautiful Sephardi Torah scroll, and I fumbled my way through their different order of prayers until they came to Kaddish, and I was able to say Kaddish. And several days later, Tom, Linnell, Miriam, and I stumbled on a pop-up Rosh Chodesh minyan at the first station in Jerusalem, and I stood at the back of a tent and said Kaddish. And that very Thursday night, the 9th of February, after a wonderful dinner with my cousin Sam Sokol, his wife Chava, and their children. Yes, that's the same Sam Sokol who writes for Haaretz and will be coming to Beth Am in May. Sam took me to a local shul up the hill that he referred to mostly lovingly as a minyan factory. And walking in a few minutes late, I joined them for a late night Mariv. And after I said Kaddish, noticing we had been late to arrive, one of the men in that Orthodox shul nodded patiently at me and said, Baruch Hu. And I said the words from the back of the room, and the congregation responded, and we had, each of us, fulfilled our obligation. Each of these minyan moments was beautiful and left a positive impression on my memory as I recall Wendy's shloshim. None left distaste in my mouth, certainly nothing approximating the horror, Zecher Amalek, speaking of which, of a very different Orthodox minyan that was captured on video 1 week after we returned from Israel. That Mariv service, such as it was, took place during a break from the terror imposed upon Hawara, as the young man, pogromists, paused to say Kaddish standing in front of the flames of their own making before they, like Amalek or Haman in their generation, sought to do more violence. So my friends, what do we do if the community we need isn't the community available to us? There are 2 possible answers, really. Option 1, run away. Find another community or make another community. That's what I did on that Thursday afternoon as the sun set on the Mediterranean, canceling my ability to say Kaddish for my sister that day. I sat with my friend, and that was good. But that option often leads to fragmentation. Individuals and small groups who can't get everything they want create new containers until the Jewish world is filled with 1,000 tiny, hermetically sealed containers. What do we do if the community we need isn't the community available to us? Option 2 is to make the community you have into the community you need. There are times when option 1 is the best option. It was for me that day in Yafo. But today is Volunteer Shabbat. This congregation thrives and will only continue to thrive when we continue to create the community we need. Travel is hard. Travel during Shloshim for your sister is even harder. If only I could have taken Betham with me. But I am grateful to return to Betham and to you. I am grateful for the myriad ways you co-create this community every time you volunteer. Synagogues need rabbis, and they need executive directors, and they need board members, and they need officers, and all of us work hard, but it is all of you and the countless ways that you contribute that makes this a kihila kedusha, a sacred congregation. Keep it up, my friends, and may you go michayil el chayil, from strength to strength. Shabbat Shalom.